So I'd like to take this opportunity to speak a little bit about Kundalini awakening, Kundalini energy, something that I have been working with now for over 30 years. I had a very powerful and probably from the perspective of many people, an overwhelming experience of Kundalini when I was 19 years old. It was quite radical and I lost the stone in weight within a week. And I had no clue really what it was, although I had an instinct that it was okay. I had an instinct that it was good. But this was not something that anyone had ever spoken of or I really was in any way prepared for. Somehow, though, I was willing just to surrender to the extremities through which it started to put me. And I got to say, many of these extremities have never left me. So there's been an ongoing process of clarification, purification that has been going on for many decades. I also lived as a Buddhist contemplative for 15 years and I'm trained as a Buddhist monk. So I can bring that contemplative training to bear upon the experience that I have had of Kundalini awakening. And I think it may be of use to some people. I'm part of a Kundalini group on Facebook, and I'm noticing from the comments that there's a lot of fascination with the symptoms, with the signs of Kundalini awakening. There's a lot of personalizing of the process, a lot of looking for affirmation or confirmations about the meaning of every single little sensation, and a lot of storytelling about what is going on, and a lot of concern for finding some sort of certainty in what is essentially an unraveling of an encounter with uncertainty. So there's a lot to be said, and all that is to be said cannot be encapsulated in one talk, but we can get the ball rolling. So what is Kundalini? Well, it's simply the force of existence itself, the force of reality, beginning to attune us as human beings to the totality of our existence, the totality of the situation in which we are actually living. It's a spiritual and religious, essentially a truly religious experience in the sense of religion in its true meaning of reconnecting with reality. That is to say, a reality we are out of connection with, a reality we have lost connection with as a culture. So essentially, the thing about Kundalini is that there is an ontological truth, there is an essential truth, there is a heart of being that pervades all time and all space, and the time and space in which every single one of us is situated. And when we're out of alignment with it, then we are in a state of disorientation, and we seek certainties where there are none. And we become fanatical about those certainties because they're continuously slipping through our fingers. And where there is certainty, the backside, the hidden side of those certainty is the inherent uncertainty of any position that is taken. So wherever there's certainty, there's uncertainty in the shadow. Wherever there is a point of view that is held on to in any way, there exists its opposite. So no point of view, in fact, can be secured for a period of time. Point of view may have relevance temporarily, but it will only be partial. So all points of view are only ever partial. They're never absolutely true. They're only ever partially true. So the only absolutely true in life is the truth itself. The fact that there is such a thing as truth has to be understood in a new way. It's not a contrivance. It's not an ideology. It's not a thought. It's not a thought out thing. It's not a point of view. It's a realization born out of intuitive seeing with the eye of awareness, the true position or the true context of our situation in this vast and mysterious universe. This is a vast and mysterious universe that is a self aware organism, and there is the intelligence within us to be able to find deep perspective, deep knowing. And the Kundalini then is the force of this purifying, awakening consciousness that, in a sense, feels like it is pressing its way through our physical organism, the organism that is apparently the definition of who and what I am, the organism that gives rise to the impression of isolation, of me isolated from everything else that is out there. It is the force that seemingly coming from, well, we don't really know from where. People say it's based at the base of the spine, but then when you really begin to explore what the base of the spine is, as sensation, and certainly as a Kundalini sensation, then it's as oceanic and as measureless as it can be. So the spine itself begins to disappear. The body itself begins to disappear because as Kundalini awakens and starts to pervade the body itself then becomes an instrument that is pervaded with consciousness, pervaded with awareness, and awareness itself becomes the instrument of seeing. Therefore, the body becomes the instrument of seeing. So, just as an eye is inherently transparent, the body, as the eye that sees the totality, the 360-degree totality of our situation, becomes an eye of wisdom, wherein the Kundalini that is seemingly on the inside begins to connect with the Kundalini that pervades all time and all space. So inside and outside, as a impression of separation, is a boundary that begins to dissolve. But it's very important to understand that really this is a process that is outside of our personal control. When we relate to the Kundalini as something that we want to get something from, when we relate to the Kundalini as in a goal orientated or in a grabby kind of a way, where we want confirmation, we want signs that we are in some way spiritual, or we are in some way heading towards enlightenment, or we are in some way special. When we're looking for these signs of confirmation, Kundalini itself starts to feel exploited by our egoity, and it will have nothing of it. It's not going to play by our rules. If you think of the Kundalini as a dragon, in a sense, serpent power, dragon, it's the dragon energy really is a kind of mythological personification of in some ways of what Kundalini is, this primal fire, this primal force that is enormous, that is immense, that is a spectacular appearance of the miraculous in a seemingly mundane world. If you relate to a dragon in a way where you try to bend it to your will, I think you'll find that the dragon is not compliant. It has no interest in being compliant. It does not do as we will. Rather, it has its agenda, it has its life that it is going to lead. And if we rather comply to its will, if we treat it with respect, and we perhaps climb onto it with care and respect, and if we entrust ourselves to it, then it will show us in its own time, as and when, and in whatever way it chooses. It will reveal to us in a timely manner everything that it is inclined to reveal to us. And this is how the Kundalini in essence works. It gives us what it cares to give us. But if you try to squeeze the orange, if you try to steer it according to your will, it will only result in pain. It will only result in more tension between what is going to happen and what is happening and what you want to happen. And that tension can express itself in the body as contraction. Now, that contraction is not something you're going to overcome quickly. The contraction is the contraction of the egoic structure. The egoic structure has been there probably for multiple lifetimes, many, many lifetimes. It's a tightness that you will feel that should be or will be ultimately revealed by the Kundalini, where there is the force of expansion that meets the contraction of the self. You're going to feel contraction. In other words, you're going to feel pain. And it's when we encounter this point of pain, and this is where the Buddha's teaching is so perfect, is so right, so poignant for an encounter with the Kundalini. When you feel that pain, it has everything to do with our reading of it, with our interpretation of the pain. The pain in and of itself is potentially many things depending on how much wisdom, how much clarity, how much understanding we bring to bear on it. But typically when we encounter pain, we meet the pain with further contraction. So we contract around the contraction. We fight it. We want to get rid of it. We want it to go away. We bhava tanha, get away. That's the Pali terminology. We bhava tanha, the desire to eradicate, the desire to get rid of. We want to get rid of it. We want it to go away. We see it as an obstruction to the pleasure that the Kundalini could potentially bring us. So if we could only just get rid of this contraction, only just get rid of this pain. And so this sort of story starts to accumulate, but contraction upon contraction is double contraction. And it's premised on a mistaken misreading of the nature of contraction itself. The contraction feels like claustrophobia. The contraction feels like entrapment. The contraction feels like it's an affliction that is bearing down on me. Whereas through the contemplative perspective, you go towards the contraction and look for the measure of the contraction. Look into the contraction itself and see, well, where is the me in this contraction? Where is the claustrophobia in this contraction? See deeply into the sensation of contraction itself and see if you can see the measure of it. See how far the sensation of the contraction itself actually extends. And if you look closely, you'll begin to see there is no measure, there is no limit to the sensation of the contraction itself. So the contraction, which feels like a limit, then becomes limitless. And in the recognition, in the seeing of the limitlessness inside of the limited, something in you will relax, because the experience of being unlimited, despite the fact it is uncomfortable, dissuades us from any concern about the need to eradicate something that no longer is a source of suffering, because the suffering isn't in the pain itself, but the suffering is in the desire to get rid of the pain. And we forget about getting rid of the pain when we find the freedom that is inherent in it. So it becomes a turning point. And that is where ignorance, the ignorance of the nature of pain, becomes wisdom. We begin to wise up to the actual nature of pain. And once that happens, there is a release of concern for outcomes. So there is no pushing and pulling. There is no trying to get to the next moment where the pain is lessened. No trying to get rid of it, or try to change the circumstance to get back to the situation before it arose. So can't go backwards, can't go forwards, but we learn to let go through the eye of wisdom, and we find ease in the dis-ease. When you find ease in the disease, then the Kundalini will really start to resolve itself. It will go to the pain and it will continually test and retest your capacity for wisdom. But as we do it, we start to stitch together the many disparate pieces, inside and out, me and you, this and that, here and there, pain and pleasure. All of these pieces start to get stitched together as you begin to recognize this one taste of freedom in all things. So then the process, the alchemy that is, you could say, being driven by the Kundalini process can follow its own course unhindered by our pushing and pulling, our poking and our wanting and our wishing and our our shaking and our insistence and our fears and our anxieties, etc., etc. Because we have to infill all of our self-serving narcissistic storytelling about the Kundalini process simply by enjoying the freedom that is in both the pleasurable and painful sensations. I'm not saying the sensation in and of itself is pleasurable. I'm emphasizing that what we're looking to see is to see the expansion in the contraction. It's the claustrophobia. It's the impression that it's bearing down on me that is the source of suffering. It's not the sensation itself. And the desire to get rid of it is disarmed through recognizing that there is no thing in the sensations that is in fact imprisoning in any way or preventing the experience of deep restfulness. You can find rest in the difficulty, but that is a contemplative skill. That is something that does take some training. I'm not expecting you on the basis of what you hear to be able to then just instantly apply this, but I'm flagging something that is of critical importance, has come from the Buddhist training, that doesn't seem to be that prevalent or well understood amongst people who are starting to experience some sort of Kundalini awakening. Yes, Kundalini awakening can be totally sensational, but the fascination with the sensational aspect of it is problematic. Having flagged that, I know it's impossible to stop it. I had years and years and years where, I was mesmerized by the Kundalini process, but eventually, just through the passage of time, you will eventually adapt and it will become normal and just becomes a sort of a normal thing that follows its own course. You recognize you have to accord with its nature. It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't mean anything about me. It's simply the universe waking up. And, the sensations that I have in my body are probably incredible. They would be considered incredible by someone who wasn't used to them, but I'm so used to them now, I barely notice it. There's bliss, there's pain, there's terror, there's contraction, there's expansion, there's fizzing electricity all through my body, there's super intensity, feels like I'm having a heart attack half the time, but it's just normal for me now. I just take it as a given. And I entrust myself to the process. I'm participating in an evolutionary process that's probably going to go on forever. I have no idea what the end of it will be. But one of the aspects of it, of course, is this surrendering, this beginning to self-forget. But it is a force of just mind-boggling potency. And to talk of it in those terms, a force of potency, is to forget that its ultimate destiny is to resolve in the Amrita Nadi, in the heart center, as uncontainable love bliss. That is the direction of travel. So it's going to sweep up everything from the tips of your toes to the complexity in your brain. It's going to resolve it all through the heart into pure radiance of love bliss. And that is all that will remain, all that will be left once this process is over. No body, no physical body even. The body will have become transparent to that. So the body will be simply a condensation, a secondary byproduct of that. Not the center, but the periphery of that love bliss. So we live in a culture that has very little cognizance of this, very little knowledge of it. And it is not something to be sought. It is something that comes to you when required, when the time is right. Nobody really knows how and when all of that conspires to occur. You should not be greedy or anxious for it. You may not want it once you have it. I can't say it's made my life easier. I mean, honestly, it's a bit of a freak out. I'm not even going to begin to recount some of the stories of what I've been through at this point. But how could it be otherwise? It's a very amazing and mysterious universe. So why should not the process of awakening have an amazing and mysterious properties and qualities and events? But the thing is, the experiences, they come and go, they arise and pass away. This is where the Buddhist training is so important. All of the very far out things that may have happened to me, they were just that, experiences that arise and pass away, and they're gone. Like farts in the breeze, they are literally gone. So to try and accumulate them and make a self out of them and make a story out of them and become excited about them and then despair when they're not there, etc., it's all a misunderstanding, a narcissistic fascination with the acquisition of spiritual coinage that you can then pull out of your pocket to serve as evidence that you're somehow spiritually wealthy, that you've got it, you've made it. It's not a self-definition mechanism. It's a self-forgetting mechanism. It's just complete opposite of that. So that's what's occurring. That's what's in store. So, if you have something strange happening while you're falling asleep or when you wake up, or you've got some strange sensation in your lips or in your top of your head, or so be it. Even if it kills us, it's fine. Because from the point of view of Kundalini, there is no death. It's just the eternal process. One thing I will tell you, just to put in perspective how extreme these things can get, and maybe it will help you learn to not worry too much. Although this may make you worry, but it came about more as a consequence of doing all-night sittings, because as a Buddhist monk, I used to do all-night sittings where we'd start sitting at 7 and we'd sit through till about 4 in the morning. So then when I used to go to sleep after sitting through the night for such a long time, basically working with and sitting with and intensifying and the Kundalini force, I would often find in my sleep that my body would rev up like a jet engine. I literally felt it was like a jet engine that was revving up and getting faster and faster and faster. My whole body was like vibrating, and there would be this screaming, soaring acceleration of power coursing through my body. And it would be so strong, I'd be in a state of complete paralysis. And I would think, I'm probably going to die. Could easily kill me any second. But I was ready I was willing for that occurrence to happen, because I was participating in life. And if this was part of the life process, so be it. I didn't die. It passed. And I've learned to accept that these very intense processes that may or may not arise. You don't need to have them to be on a path of awakening. But if you do have them, it's important just to accept the ride that you're given. I mean, I once taught a class, and it was actually the end of my tenure of teaching 15 years at the barn, and this is one reason why. I taught a class where I gave a pointing out instruction, and the woman had a slight involuntary movement of, you could say, force moving through her shoulder. And she was utterly and totally appalled and terrified by what was essentially just a very minor event. But what it was a glimpse of a reality to which she was just simply not accustomed to, but is a reality, in fact, we are all swimming and have shut ourselves off from. And while I tried to answer the woman as politely as I could, in all honesty, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, this is nothing. This is just life. But because it's in such stark contrast to the concretized and sterile life of the body, boxed in as an organ of isolation, because it was in contrast to that, she was shaken to her core. But really, if you are entering this game, you're going to be shaken to your core. Not in a way that is terrifying, because as I said, we are heading towards love, bliss, not some sort of sterile terror train ride. To whatever extent there is terror or fear in your practices, because you are dissociated from the inherent love bliss that is already the case, in which we are participant. So the Kundalini is going to take you there. And if we are resistant to it, then of course fear will arise. But the fear is okay, and the fear is really the backside or the back of the hand is the key to the fearlessness, is the key to the love. So fear, you could say, is the complete absence of love, and love is the absence of fear. And they can, bizarrely enough, coexist, and the Kundalini will show us this. So it's in fact the Kundalini itself that has compelled me and propelled me and to start talking about it openly. The time has come in these days of emergency and emergence from our positions of isolated pain. The time has come to start to speak more publicly, more openly about these matters, these things, because I've come to the conclusion this is not something that should remain secret, but it's also not something that should be made overly special. It's very important that this whole spiritual process starts to become normalized. We should not expect anything other than spiritual awakening to be something rather extraordinary. Your birth and emergence and appearance as a human being is rather amazing and extraordinary. And your death and passing is also going to be a process of radical transition and change. So the extraordinary, the radical, the mysterious, it's already built in to what is going to occur in your case, no matter what. So it's time just to accept it, get on with it, and start to learn the methodologies, the technologies of awakening. Start to listening to more people like me and the many other people who are also worth listening to, who you may find, who you feel some sort of resonance with. Start to accept that wherever you find yourself, it's only a stepping stone to where you're going to end up, and it's not going to be the same place as you are now. That's for sure. Like it or not, that transition, that transformation is coming. So we always used to say in the monasteries, die before you die so you don't die when you die. So we're here to discover what the death of self is, what the resurrection is, as a result of the death of self, then what the attunement to the universal is. So that is when the wave realizes its connection to the ocean. It doesn't choose the ocean over the wave, but the wave can't separate from the ocean. So it's and. It's not either or. You become oceanic. You become particular. You become the unique you that is you, but you also become the universal. And the universal mind is luminous, unborn, immeasurable, full of love, equanimity, balance, wisdom, and an impression and direct experience of safety and well-being in the cognizance of being participant in something that is eternally good. So this is just an opening shot, an opening